Welcome to Residential Tech Talks. I'm Jeremy Glowacki, Executive Editor of Residential Tech Today. This week, Dave Nauber joins us from Connecticut, where he is Director of Brand for Sound United's Classé audio product line. Founded in 1980, Classé Audio manufactures a suite of high-fidelity amplifiers, pre-amplifier processors, and integrated amplifiers for movie and music enthusiasts. Prior to the brand's acquisition from Bowers and Wilkins, Dave was president of Classé Audio, having earned that role after serving as executive VP of brand development after joining the company back in 2002. He's here today to help us learn a little bit more about the amplifier category in general, and more specifically, Classé Audio's new Delta series. Dave Nauber, thanks for joining me on the podcast today.
I'm super happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
I see, looking at your background, that you're a University of Illinois graduate. Did you, like me, grow up in the Midwest?
I did. I was born and raised in Quincy, Illinois. Quincy is what we call downstate Illinois, so it's in the westernmost part of the state on the Mississippi River. If you look at the state, how it kind of bows out to the west, that's where Quincy is. And I went to school at the University of Illinois. I earned an engineering degree. It's a general engineering degree with an electrical engineering secondary field.
So that led to audio how? Because that's not always the pathway to audio.
Well, really, I'd say audio led to that. So I was interested in audio since being a teenager. Instead of buying a car, I borrowed money from my parents and bought hi-fi equipment. And then when I thought I would like to be, I understood technology pretty well and did well in school. And I thought being an engineer would be a way to be somehow involved in audio potentially. But when I got to school, I found that there were audio stores that had equipment that was at a much higher level than I even knew existed. And so I was listening to some really fabulous products and thinking it was just the coolest stuff. And one day I went to what was the best store in town, and I was waiting outside for the doors to open for a sale because I wanted to get a component on sale. And the guy who managed the store, he opened the door and he asked me what I was looking for, and I told him. And then I just, on impulse, I just said, "By the way, is there any chance you'd need any summer help?" And it just showed that I had no idea how the audio business worked, how it was slow in the summer and busy in the winter. He chuckled.
Right.
He chuckled and he said, "Well, actually, we could maybe use a little help, now." So he invited me to come to work on a Tuesday evening, which I did, and I loved it. And he said, "Could you come back on Thursday?" And I did that. It was great. How about Saturday? And then from that point on, I worked almost every day. And at the same time, I was a bartender and a doorman at a very popular campus bar, the kind of place where all your friends think that's the coolest job ever. And for about 2 weeks, it was really cool. And then it was a job. It was like, oh, I got to go to work tonight. But I realized after about 6 months that there hadn't been a single day that I didn't look forward to going into work at the store. And at the same time, I was thinking to myself that I was not going to be a great engineer. And I was sitting in classrooms with guys who were probably going to be really great engineers, guys and women. And in fact, for my senior project, a small group of us did this project, and I did all of the writing and I did all the presenting of the project. So I understood exactly what was going on, but I wasn't the best person to actually do the engineering part of it. So there's a thread of consistency throughout, you can see here. And when I graduated, I was looking at IBM, Harris Semiconductor, even Quaker Oats. And the person who had hired me had gone on to become the marketing director for Madrigal Audio Labs, which at the time was the manufacturer of Mark Levinson.
Yeah.
And also the importer of Meridian and Accuphase and Cabas and Jadis and Lerneo, various brands. And I just thought to myself, an engineering path is probably not going to be the happiest path of life for me, but I love audio. I'm young. Let me give it a shot. And so here I am, whatever it is, 35 years later, 36 years later. I've only moved on to my second job as an adult. So I was with Madrigal for something like 16 and a half years, and then moved on to Classé as you mentioned earlier, in 2002. And so, yeah, for me, it's been just a terrific career path.
So when you transitioned from college into your first out of college job at Madrigal, what does a guy that's not really much of an engineer but loves high end audio do for that first role? How do you make that
I
move?
was I was a regional manager, a Midwest regional manager. So I got to do more or less the same thing that I'd been doing at the store, which was I got to interact with a lot of different people. I could translate some things about the technology to help them understand what made our products better or different from other people's products. And I got to listen to music through some of the best hi-fi systems in the world. So the kinds of products I was associated with, I was very proud of the kind of product, and also it was just such an enjoyable thing to be involved with. So I never really found a good reason to move on. I I drove a Volvo station wagon around 20 state territory. It was packed full of hi-fi equipment, and yeah, it was in retrospect really a fun time. Yeah.
And then in 2002, you end up at Classé, a Montreal-based company. What was that? How did that connection occur?
Well, every year we would do an analysis for the upcoming budget year, and one of the elements we would include in that was the top three competitors, and sort of an evaluation of where they were, what they were doing, and how we were going to be different and better. And for the first time ever, in 2000, in the winter of like February of 2002, I included Classé on my list of top three competitors. And the reason was because Joe Atkins, the chairman of Bowers and Wilkins had gotten involved with Classé. And I knew that if Joe was involved, they would be doing something serious. And little did I know that I'd be a part of that. But at the time, I just thought, they've got this distribution arrangement and something's going on there. So I think we got to keep our eye on Classé. So a couple of months later, I got a call from Joe, and he explained how they were involved with Classé, which I knew, and how he was looking for this succession plan person. And at the time, I'm a very loyal guy, and I felt that I had been well treated by the management, the president and CEO at Madrigal, Mark Glazier and Phil Muzzio. And I thought that even though things at that time we had been purchased by Harman, and there were going to be some changes, I thought, and by the way, we'd purchased by Harman, and then some years later there were going to be some changes that didn't happen. One didn't immediately cause the other, but there were some changes about to happen, and I thought it's a challenging time, but I just don't want to leave, what I think what we built here. I don't want to leave that. And so I said, thanks, but no thanks. And then about a month later, we had a meeting, and there was a reorganization happening. And although I was going to be promoted, there were other things happening that I thought, well, this is just not going to work. So I called Joe and I said, have you hired anybody for that, that Classé job? And he said no. So I got together with him and with Mike Viglis, who is the co-founder of Classé. We had a meeting in Montreal, and I had never met Joe before, nor Mike. and I just thought these were like the coolest guys. They were just like they were serious, but they were fun.
Hmm.
It's a really interesting combination. And then Joe made me a terrific offer, and it was done in a way that it really had no downside. So I felt like I wasn't really taking any risk. So I made the move and didn't look back. It was a good move for me.
Well, as you join that company and the company that you're with now, of course, the brand you're with, uh, what did you know about the history going back to 1980 and the founding? I know that's one of those little those foundation stories are interesting. I heard a little bit about it from a conversation that you posted a year ago with Phil Jones introducing the brand with the Sound United connection, and also
Yeah,
on your website there's a nice little write up. Can you give
yeah,
that background around 1980?
sure. Well, of course, I wasn't there, so I heard the
Yeah.
story from Mike Viglis. So Mike was a Greek immigrant, and I really really wish I could do impersonations
Oh,
because
really?
if I could tell the story with his accent,
Hmm.
it would be much funnier. But Mike was an entrepreneur. He'd made his fortune in the trucking business. He was the world's largest Ford truck dealer for something like 6 years running. And he owned a hotel in Florida. So he spent his winters in Florida, as you would if you've got the money and you're Canadian.
Yeah.
Um, and he was an audiophile. So he had high end systems in Florida and in Montreal. And up until that point, he had been a tube lover. So he'd been a big fan of vacuum tube amplifiers, and they were in those days less reliable than they are today. And and he told a story, which again, if I could do it with all of his gestures, also it would be quite good. But the bottom line is what happened was the amplifier exploded, and he was talking about how the people were pulling capacitor wadding out of their hair. Maybe that was an exaggeration, but
Right.
it helps you kind of picture the scene. Very smoky in the room,
Sure.
and everybody knew that his stereo system was crazy expensive,
Okay.
and so he just was totally embarrassed by that. And there was a dealer that knew of this guy David Reach, who was a designer making some amplifiers locally under the name Ellison. And so he introduced Mike to David, and Mike really liked David a lot. And um, he was making this little Class A amplifier, so Class A with the letter A,
Hmm.
and uh, just 25 watt per channel stereo amplifier. And Mike just thought it sounded amazing. So here was this tube lover who experienced for the first time a properly designed um, solid state Class A amplifier, and he
Hmm.
fell in love with it. And of course, the notion of being able to get a solid state product that sounded wonderful and would be reliable, it really was that was the thing he was looking for. So shortly thereafter, he decided that he could invest a little money and they could turn it into like what he would call a real company. So they took an industrial space and they started to manufacture under the name Classé. So with an accent on the E.
Hmm.
Um, the name actually reminds you that it started as a company that was using Class A topologies, but also it reminds you of the French Canadian heritage of the brand.
Yeah, and I have. I'm not an audiophile. I've covered the audio business for a long time now, and I know the Class A, Class B um, categories, the Class A, B. But for those who maybe not so familiar with what the differences are and why Class A is a Class A oriented brand, could you just give us a little overview of that? You don't have to go into deep technical details, but just what the
So,
main ideas are behind those designations.
so you want me to leave the whiteboard
Yeah, I know
aside?
you don't really want to go there because that engineering stuff never really
Yeah,
sunk
yeah,
in,
yeah.
but
Yeah.
Yeah, just what are the characteristics of those different designations?
Well, the technical difference between a Class A amplifier and a Class B amplifier, or even an AB amplifier, is that the Class A amplifier has no uh, crossover distortion. Crossover distortion is what happens when the signal is going between being plus and minus. So let me just back up a second and say, if you just picture a loudspeaker um, sitting at rest, and then you start to apply an audio signal to it. When the signal is plus, the cone is moving out away from the box, and when it's minus, it's moving from the rest position behind the
Okay.
box. So plus is everything on the outside of the rest position, and minus is everything on the internal box side of the rest position. And so the signal obviously goes back and forth between plus and minus. A conventional amplifier is what's designed in a form called push-pull. And so you can think of it as pushing and pulling that driver back and forth, the speaker back and forth. And if we've got time, I'll give you two quick analogies that may help
Sure.
somebody understand it. So in a push-pull amplifier, think of the amp as having a plus side and a minus side. One's for the plus part of the wave, and one's for the minus side of the wave. And if you can kind of picture the plus and minus halves of the amplifier both grabbing the speaker and pulling and pushing it back and forth throughout its entire excursion, that's what a Class A amplifier does. What a Class B amplifier does is it has the plus half of the amp pull the speaker, push the speaker away from the box, and then come back to the rest position, and then tell the minus side of the amp to pull it into the box.
Okay.
And so the two halves of the amplifier are totally independent of each other. And by virtue of the way that the parts work, the transistors work, there's this period of time where that handover, let's say that transition from plus to minus,
Mm-hmm.
it can't be done smoothly. So there's think of it as just sort of stopping and then starting again, stopping and starting again. That's crossover distortion.
Okay.
If you have a Class AB amplifier, what it is it's minimizing the crossover distortion, not eliminating, but minimizing by continuing the pushing and pulling past the 0 point. So there's a small port in the middle around the 0 point where it's actually in Class A. Both sides of the amplifier are pushing and pulling. All audio amplifier designs that are not Class A are built to try to all hi-fi amplifier designs that are not Class A are designed to try to sound as close to Class A as they can, but to do it with more efficiency. And so that's what a Class AB amplifier is. It's an efficient enough way to sort of sound like Class A, but not sound terrible like a Class B amp would, with this huge amount of distortion.
Okay.
So that's one analogy. Is if you think of this pushing and pulling, I kind of imagine it like people on the both ends of a double-handed saw.
Yeah.
If they're both working together like they normally would, that's what a Class A amplifier is like. But if it's a Class A or A, B or B, then there's a big part of the cycle where one person is pulling or pushing all by themselves.
Yeah.
It's this transition where the distortion happens. The other analogy is if you could picture how a relay race works, two runners running around a track. A Class B amplifier would sort of be like when I approach the person who I'm going to give the baton to, I have to stop some distance away from them, and they're stopped. I toss the baton to them, and then they start running again. And if you look at the the smoothness of the speed of the baton, it would not be smooth. That's what the crossover distortion is. In a Class AB design, it's similar to a conventional relay race where I start running before the person in front of me starts running before I arrive with the baton, so that I can hand the baton off more smoothly. And then a Class A amplifier would be one where the runners just run side by side all the way around the track and just hand the baton back and forth. So it's the purest form of amplification. It doesn't have any of the crossover distortion, but it's also inefficient. So if you can kind of picture two runners running all the way around the track together, they'd get tired, right? It takes more energy to do that. So anyway,
So
I hope some of that made sense.
Well, so you make B sound like it's not so great. What would be the use case for a Class B amplifier? Why would you even want that?
It's in the absence of Class D, which is what actually happens now. If you wanted to make an inexpensive amplifier that didn't generate much heat, that's what you would do.
Okay.
The downside of Class A is it generates more heat because both halves of the amp are constantly working.
Okay.
So they're it's called fully biased. So in a Class B amplifier, you wouldn't have that situation, and it runs much, much cooler.
Okay.
And AB is somewhere in between.
All right. Well, I want to continue this conversation. We're going to get into actual products that result from this technology, but first we need to take a short break.
For 25 years, Leon has been dedicated to creating innovative products that mix art with audio and design with technology. Knowing that technology is an integral part of modern interior design, Leon's collection of customizable speakers and technology concealment solutions is designed to deliver both sound and style to any space. From signature soundbars that seamlessly blend in with the display to art and frames that turn your TV into a work of art, Leon's products are built to order and handcrafted just for you to ensure a perfect match every time. Visit www.leonspeakers.com to learn more.
Welcome back. I'm Jeremy Glowacki, and I'm talking with Dave Nauber, Director of Brand for Sound United's Classé Audio. Dave, we got into a long conversation there about Class A and Class B and Class A, B, and D. So I wanted to kind of go back to what you think Class A as a company, with the accent, not the Class A technology, amplification technology. What has been the thing that set it apart as a company, besides the fact that you use Class A amplification, obviously, and there's a purity to that. What has set it apart as a brand, as an amplifier brand, throughout the years, and maybe prior to the Sound United purchase, just to sort of give background as opposed to current day?
I think that we have we've been an audio design company. So think of it as like engineering driven or engineering led. We've been building products with a very open mind. I think that there are a lot of high-end companies that have they have a single idea, and then they kind of flog that idea forever. And maybe it does get better and better, but they don't ever stop and say, is this the right way to do it, or is this the best way to do it? And that doesn't always have to apply to the audio circuitry. So I'll give you one example, which was that at the beginning of the Delta Series design project in the early 2000s, we were considering how best to control the product. And the idea was that we were going to have a screen on the front so we could show video, like on a surround processor. You would be able to show the video of the signal coming through. And we thought we would want to be able to use that screen for control. And so the first idea was that you had the screen and you had buttons along the side. And I looked at it and I said, it just looks a bit like an ATM. And so one of the engineers, he said, well, why don't we make it a touch screen? And I said, well, isn't that expensive? And he lied and he said no. And so, so we went down this path of designing products with touchscreen control. Um, in the end, the engineer actually turned out to be kind of right, because it meant once we had the touchscreen designed, we were reusing that same piece of hardware and much of the software over and over. And so over time, it became less expensive than designing a completely new faceplate with all independent buttons and so on, the way most products are built. So it was actually a great idea, but it showed a couple of things. Our willingness to try something new. We were the first audio company to use touchscreen control. We were well in advance of the iPod Touch, for example. So the benefits of having a touchscreen are that you can take your best guess at how to build the interface so that it's simple and easy to use and useful. But you don't really know how it's going to work until you get it into the market and people react to it. And the benefit of the touchscreen is that once people react to it, you can refine it. You can say, well, I would like it to do this, or I would like it to let me do something different. And in a conventional product, you need a different faceplate because it's all buttons that are hard, or it's really cryptic and hard to use because you don't know what you're choosing, up and down buttons and stuff like that.
Sure.
So with the touchscreen, we can just redesign it and load new software into the product. And as long as the hardware can support whatever new thing we want to try, away we go. So,
Sure.
So the touchscreen was an innovative solution at the time. Now it's just seen as a pretty common thing, but we were the first ones to do it. And I think it just showed an example of how we were always looking to make a better product. And that means everything, not just how it sounds. We've also experimented with we've developed in a very serious way different things. We've done multi-channel, which is something that a lot of high-end audio companies don't want to touch. Right. It's super complicated and expensive to develop. So we've taken our chances there, and we built a surround processor that was the most popular product ever from the Classé brand. It was a multi-channel processor. So we had success in the multi-channel range. We also developed Class D amplifiers. The easy thing is to just keep building the kind of amp you've always built. I always thought, I didn't want to wake up one morning and have some company find out that some company had developed a Class D amplifier that sounded as good or better than our Class A amplifiers somehow. And yet it was smaller and lighter and more efficient and cooler and all that. And so I thought, we really ought to really understand that technology, and we ought to see if we can be the first ones to build that kind of amplifier. And what we found was that you could build a Class A, a Class D amplifier that was performing at a very, very high level, but not like the highest level. And the type of design was such that if you tried to simplify it and make it less expensive, it was a bit like a house of cards. It would just fall apart. So there was a kind of a sweet spot for us with Class D, that at a certain price, it was better than Class AB amplifiers, all the competition, all the linear amplifiers. But if you wanted to spend more money, like we're doing today, you could get better performance. And if you wanted to spend less money, you could get better performance from linear amplifiers. Okay. So anyway, it was very helpful to have gone through that whole exercise. We're now in a position, as the types of parts that are used for Class D continue to evolve, we're in a position that we can actually implement a Class D design in the future if that's something that makes sense.
And so now with your acquisition by Sound United, that was 2018, correct?
Yes.
You had been owned by Bowers and Wilkins, and that afforded, I guess, a different manufacturing scenario during that time, which is your entire history with the company. Bowers and Wilkins was involved, but what changed from a capability standpoint with the acquisition from Sound United? Do you feel like so far that you've experienced what has improved for the company?
Well, it's a kind of a long subject, so I'll hit what I think of as the highlights. When I joined the company, we were building product in Montreal. As Bowers and Wilkins was acquiring the company, they were looking at the plans we had, the volume that we needed. We needed more space than we had, and Joe was looking around saying, well, we have capacity at our facility in China. So despite the negative connotations on the marketing side, we said, okay, well, we'll move our manufacturing to China, and we'll just have to deal with what that means. So we had to look through how to deal with manufacturing something on the other side of the world.
Right.
And that was a pretty big challenge for a small company like ours. But I'll tell you, it really forced us to make a better product. And the reason was that we couldn't just walk down the hallway and fix something on the production floor. We couldn't just answer a question. We had to build a product, as they say, designed for manufacture. This was truly, it had to be designed so that it would go together in a way that was very uniform. Every single unit was exactly like every other unit. And it comes then to a very easy pass-fail. It either works or it doesn't work. It either does all the stuff it's supposed to do or it doesn't. So that was really, for us, a big step in the quality of the product. You can think of it as the craftsmanship moving from the production floor where people were making decisions about how to do something. It was moving upstream to the design lab.
Sure.
Once we were acquired by Sound United, we went to a different level. When we went first to China, we were in the Bowers and Wilkins factory, and so you could kind of think of us as teaching them how to build electronics. Whereas when you go to Shirakawa, this is one of the most advanced audio manufacturing facilities in the world. So we didn't have to teach them anything. We had to figure out what it is they needed from us on the design side so that they could build the product there in a way that they're used to, so that, again, we get the same result. They have so many, they have testing capabilities that we never had before.
Okay.
So it was possible for us, on the pre-production side, before we settled on the design, to make sure that the product absolutely was rock solid in every way you can imagine. Trust me, every way that you can imagine. And then on the production side, it's a similar kind of story where they have the ability to do the kind of testing that we didn't have before. So we don't have to teach them how to put things together. They know how to do that. It's the testing that's gone into the product, both at the design level and at the manufacturing level, that makes the product jump to yet a new, I think, a new quality level, higher than we've ever experienced before. And I think it's a huge competitive advantage for Classé if you compare it to the options that are available to other high-end companies. They either have to build things locally, which means that they have to, God forbid, build things by hand. Like, I would not want a heart monitor built by hand, right? You know what I mean? You want consistency. You want to be able to reassure the customer that this amplifier sounds exactly like our engineers designed it to sound.
I liked a comment you made. I heard you make a comment, I believe, with your conversation with Phil Jones, where you said you don't want to just make one great amplifier. You want to make many great amplifiers or something to that effect.
Yeah, well, that's exactly it. If you can't make two amplifiers that are exactly alike, then your left and right channels won't be exactly alike. It means you effectively can't make one. And so the consistency is really a very important part of delivering what I think you have to deliver.
Well, it's interesting that you started obviously with B&W, Bowers and Wilkins. I'll say it out the full name. Then you separate from Bowers and Wilkins, and then they're reacquired by they're acquired by Sound United after you're acquired by Sound United. Has that been interesting to reacquaint with that brand, or is there any synergy there at all now that it's a?
Oh, there's a huge amount of synergy. The amplifiers that we manufacture today were literally designed with the previous generation 800 series, and the load that the new generation of 800 represents to the amplifier is very similar. So the amplifier doesn't really even know that it's hooked up to a different speaker. Mm-hmm. But the process was good for us because it led to an amplifier that I think is better able to drive any speaker, no matter what it is. Okay. So I think we have a more universal amplifier design. Now, it is more expensive. So if you want an amp that will drive anything, then it is going to cost a little more if you want it to be at this quality level. But I think we owe that to the fact that we were using 800 series speakers in the development of the amplifier in the first place. Plus, it's been a little bit like old home week. Not all the same people are there as were there when I was there last, but there are still enough of them that it's great to be reacquainted and to actually have a working relationship with those guys. So it's been fun.
So as you work to create the new Delta series, what has changed in amplifier technology or manufacturing capabilities that you were able to implement? What is the new Delta series versus the old Delta series, and from a design standpoint?
From a design standpoint, we've done a couple of things. One is we have, I don't want to be too technical here. We've optimized the amplifiers to drive low impedance loads more effortlessly than before. We have spent more money, which it doesn't sound like a high-tech thing, but it is related. So I'll give you one example. You build a power supply, and the power supply has to deliver energy to the amplifier circuits and the speakers. And with music, that energy demand can happen very quickly. You need to have a lot of energy for a really short period of time, and so the way that the amp can pull power out of the power supply that's an important consideration in the design. And if you kind of imagine that you've pulled power out of the power supply, you also have to put power back into the power supply so that it's ready for that next beat.
Sure.
And we use some capacitors from a German company called Mundorf that are designed in a way, they're called 4-pole capacitors. And basically what it means is that we're able to pull energy out more quickly, and we're able to refill that energy more quickly, so that the power supply always feels like it's this big, limitless, perfect supply of power to the audio circuits. They cost a lot more money than the types of caps that we used previously, but in the end, that's a result you get. So so that's really worth it. We've also refined the cooling tunnel. We have something that we call the IC tunnel, intelligent cooling tunnel. I think it's a very clever name. I thought of it myself. Icy like cold. So you're pretty good, huh? Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, it's active cooling, and we introduced it in the last generation, but we refined it in this generation. And the reason it's important, a lot of people, I think, misunderstand the purpose. a lot of people think that the reason you have active cooling is to give more installation flexibility. You can put such an amplifier into an equipment rack and stack other amps right on top of it, and you don't have to have all that vertical space for convection cooling. You can put it into a cabinet. As long as you have a place for the warm air to go, it works perfectly in very confined spaces. But that's like maybe the third or fourth benefit. The primary benefit, speaking as an audiophile, the primary benefit is that it allows us to control the temperature. There are thousands of parts inside of an amplifier. And if you were to look at the spec sheet or the data sheet of a given part, like a capacitor or transistor, typically you see something that has its rating or its performance versus temperature. And that just tells you that the temperature plays a role in how it works. And if you don't have control of the temperature, it means that there are variations in the performance of all of these different parts, and you won't get the consistency of sound. So we were talking of consistency earlier. This is another level. It's taken that consistency from unit to unit, and it's saying it from minute to minute. It's saying that this product is always operating at the same temperature inside, and therefore we have controlled that variable, and you're getting the result that we said you should get.
Okay.
So it's a hugely important thing to be able to control temperature. If your room is warm, if your room is cool, it doesn't really matter, because we're always monitoring the temperature, controlling the speed of the fan so that it spins at the right RPM to deliver that operating temperature.
Okay.
Another benefit is that the temperature of electronic components is a big determining factor in their longevity. Mm-hmm. So the mean time between failure increases dramatically if the parts work at a lower temperature. So by not allowing the parts to get too hot, we extend the life of the products by many, many, many years. In some cases, probably it'll be measured in decades.
Wow.
So a huge difference in the life expectancy. Okay. And then you get to things like installation flexibility after that.
So what all encompasses the new Delta series? What do you have in the line? I know that Classé doesn't have a ton of SKUs. So what did you put in the Delta series?
Our plan, even long term, is not to build this into a line of 20 or 30 or 50 products. We want to have a very select group, have each model in that group represent the expression of that type of product in that category. So one mono amplifier, one stereo amplifier, one stereo preamplifier. That's what we have today. The stereo preamp has digital capabilities, so it can do streaming and USB, computer connections, as well as it has an internal phono stage. So it's a full function, all-in preamp. That will be upgraded, and you'll be able to buy an upgrade kit to update yours if you have the current one. But those are the three models that we have today.
Okay.
We are, and they're one of the reasons there are only three and not others at the moment is because these products take a very long time to develop. These are not versions of the last models we made. We didn't just go in and change a couple things. We actually did a new ground up design. So so the development times are long. Next, we will have a 5-channel power amp called the Delta Cinema. We'll follow that with a Delta ISP, which is an immersive sound processor. And then we will have a stereo integrated amplifier. And then I can't talk about what we'll have beyond that, but anyway, it'll take us a while to get those into the market, but those are what's coming next.
So I'd love to have you, say how long that's going to take. But before I do, you were hit with the pandemic right when you were releasing the Delta series. So did that affect you for a while, or were you able to then pick up on the trends that came out of the pandemic, which was a lot of investment in the home and really a reemergence in some high-end audio and also multi-channel rooms, theaters and that sort of thing. So what were some of the challenges initially, and then has the supply chain, I guess you throw that in there too,
Yeah, yeah. Well, we've had some challenges. The first, the first of these new Delta series products shipped in January of 2020.
Great timing, yeah.
Yeah. So if you were to go back and say, could we make it? Probably wouldn't change that timing. That'd be about as bad as it could get. So it was a challenge because we weren't. It's not like we had a line of products and these were just some new products that came along and we had all this distribution and everything was just going along as normal. We had not sold products for nearly 2 years, and so we were effectively starting from scratch with distribution, and we were starting with some products that were different. So some of our good dealers from the past weren't necessarily the right dealers for the future, and so we were effectively starting over with distribution. And by being unable to take the amplifiers and preamp to the showroom and demonstrate it and show what it was all about, it really limited our ability in the early stages of the pandemic. It limited our ability to get the product into the marketplace. Over time, over the first, let's say, after about 6 months, that started to ease up. We started to get more and more ability to go into the stores. From the beginning, we've gotten just amazing reviews. And so a dealer who has confidence in the Classé brand and from past experience, let's say, and sees a couple of these reviews, they can kind of know that it's a safe bet, right? Mm-hmm. And they may some dealers brought the products back in essentially because they just had faith that it would be good, and it has been. So the distribution started to get built back up, and we were doing, actually exceeding all of our expectations through about March last year, and then suddenly we were hit with a supply chain problem. First, there was an AKM fire, which we used 3 AKM chips in the preamp, and we were able to obtain 2 of them, but not the third one, so we had to work through that. And then we were out of the Nauber capacitors I mentioned for the amplifiers. They just couldn't get the raw materials, and we went for a couple of months without being able to build amplifiers. And then there were further chip problems. NXP processors that are used in cars were unavailable, so we had to redesign a board to take a different NXP chip that had a feature we didn't need. But still, it was possible to get back in production. And then there have been other things. We've been paying, in some cases, 20 times the normal price of a chip just to have the part to be able to continue production. Wow. Yeah, it's been excuse me a second. It's been a challenge, and so those challenges continue. The part shortages have gone across the board, so it's not just chips. We've been short resistors, capacitors. As you can imagine, we don't use the same parts that are used in Denon Marantz, at least not generally so. So we have more what's the right word? We just have parts that come from smaller companies, or things that are made in smaller batches, and they're just harder to get sometimes.
Yeah.
And as you can imagine, you can't just substitute any capacitor with that value. You can't just pop it in there and get the same result. So we have to work very hard to try to come up with the parts. So it's been a real challenge. That continues to be a problem for us. We've been making products and we've been shipping products, but but it's not without a huge amount of effort. So yeah, it's been a challenge all along. As far as there are various things. There's I think a kind of a flight to quality. There's definitely people who are spending more money on things for their home, which include audio systems. I think all those things benefit us because they benefit our dealers.
Sure.
So the dealers are very active today. They're doing pretty well. And then, they're ordering Classé. They're waiting in some cases a while to get it. But they do eventually get it. And so yeah, who knows how long that'll last.
Right.
There are clearly a lot of headwinds there, but we're doing everything we can to keep building products.
Well, it sounds like you need to really focus on manufacturing what you've got designed and are creating, rather than worry too much about the multi-channel stuff that's coming up ahead. But you have to do both, right? You have to eat.
Yeah,
or you got to walk and chew gum at the same time.
It's a very astute observation. That is, and that's, I would say, if you were to ask what is the biggest problem today for us, it's continuing the pace of development of these new models while chasing down all of the things that have to be done in order to keep product in production. So it's a real challenge.
Well, being with a bigger company like Sound United, I would imagine takes a little stress off, at least from a logistical standpoint. But no one has it as easy these days, no matter how big you are.
It's absolutely true, but it's undeniable that if you have a big customer like Sound United, who may buy X number of these parts, and you need Y number of these other parts, just a small. They just it's a small amount. It's hundreds, thousands.
Yeah.
There's a certain kind of leverage that we now can get that we never would have had before. So so it's a huge advantage there.
Well, I feel like we've talked a long time. We could probably keep talking. There's a lot that we didn't cover, but I appreciate your time, Dave. It was great chatting with you. It was really insightful and enjoyable.
Well, I had a great time as well. I look forward to talking again. Good to see you.
Dave Nauber is Director of Brand for Sound United's Classé Audio. You can learn more about his Classé products at classeaudio.com. And that wraps up today's show. If you're new to Residential Tech Talks, please subscribe to the weekly podcast and consider rating and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts. Also, check out all the latest residential tech news at the magazine's website, restechtoday.com, where you can also subscribe to the bi-monthly print or digital magazine and to our Tuesday and Friday email newsletters. Until next time, please stay safe, stay inspired, and let us know if you have a great story to tell.
Residential Tech Talk, lighting specialist to residential tech.